I've seen this as a common pitfall for many engineers. First off, recognizing, going back to the awareness that there is commercial impacts with technical decisions, that broadening your view beyond simply the technical aspect of something is important. Some of the signals you can watch for are, is a customer asking you to sign something? Are they asking you something that's kind of beyond the scope? Are they pressing you for more information or for an enhanced scope? There's nothing better in project management than keeping track of what you are doing and closing the door on potential landmine spots.
Have you ever found yourself struggling to negotiate project requirements with stakeholders in a technical environment? Well, if so, you're in the right place today. So negotiation skills are crucial for technical project managers as they play a significant role in the success of a project. And in this episode, Rick Czaplewski, distinguished speaker, executive trainer, and also the founder of No One Walks Alone, is going to be sharing with us some negotiation techniques that'll really make you the most effective project manager in the room. I'm your host, Matt Douglas, and in this episode of the Engineering Project Management Podcast, we're going to be getting right into this topic today. And with that, let's jump into today's episode. All right, everybody, it is now time for our PM conversation of the week with Rick Czaplewski. Rick, welcome to the Engineering Project Management Podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Matthew. Great. Thanks for having me.
Good. We're glad to have you on, and we just want to get right into it really quickly here. So we just want to know a little bit about you. So can you start off by telling us a little bit more about yourself, what you do on a daily basis, and also what motivated you to start No One Walks Alone?
Yeah, my name is Rick Czaplewski. I'm the president of a company called No One Walks Alone. I work with companies that want to enhance their margin and improve their cash flow by teaching their folks better negotiation skills, especially in the context of project management. And in my history, I'm a CPA, I'm a PMP. I've worked for the mobility, technology, and water industries. I've been a project manager and up to senior director in those industries. So I'm very excited to be here to work with you today, Matthew.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for the introduction. So now we want to talk about negotiation and negotiation skills. So could you tell us why negotiation skills for project managers, why is that so important, and how can it impact our project success?
The ultimate financial benchmark for a project is margin and cash flow. Are you being paid, and is your project making money? And as a project progresses, project managers have to make trade-offs, whether that's scope trade-offs, concessions, financial concessions, schedule changes. All of those require good negotiation skills by project managers. Either lack of negotiation skills or unawareness of certain situations can mean your projects don't perform as well as you had hoped. So I teach project managers negotiation skills to ensure that they have project success.
Awesome. And so in your opinion, what are the basic principles of negotiation that every technical project manager should understand and possess?
That starts with awareness. Where I see technical project managers get into trouble is technical changes or decisions are made without understanding potentially a commercial or a legal consequence. So good negotiation starts with an understanding. From there, good project management skills are also very important for negotiations. When you think of negotiations, Matthew, what comes to mind?
So for me, when I think of negotiations, I think of bartering, I guess I would say. Like I might want a certain thing. You may want a certain price for that thing, and we kind of negotiate that price, or we not argue the price, but barter the price, haggle the price, and in order for us to both get the best value that we're looking for.
That's a very common answer to this question. I think most of us, when we think about negotiation, we think about the bargaining step, the point where we are sitting across from a counterpart and we're working towards a solution for an issue. And for many project managers, that might mean settling a claim. But to me, good negotiation begins well before you're bargaining. And a skill that project managers should start with is twofold. One is good project management skills. And the three core skills of good project management are good communication skills, organization, and taking action. Good communication means keeping your customer and your stakeholders informed of what's going on. The good, the bad, the ugly, let them know. Being organized means as you're going through your project, staying on top of your milestones and documenting those in a project record, whatever system you might have, like a Trello, SAP, etc., making sure that you're keeping on top of and documenting what you're doing. And the third point, which is going to be one of the most important things, is taking action. Project management is an offensive sport. You have the ball, take action. If you do those three things as a project manager, you're avoiding shooting yourself in the foot. Dale Carnegie said, the easiest way to win an argument is to avoid getting into one in the first place. And the easiest way to avoid a negotiation later in the project is to do an effective job at project management. The second piece of that is creating a good customer environment. If you have a good relationship with your customer on the other end, it's going to be a lot easier to resolve issues down the road. That's not 100% true, but 80 to 90% of the time, you're going to have somebody on the other side who's invested in resolving issues equitably and expediently at the end of a project. And that's where you want to be when you finally sit down and have the bargaining discussion.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a great tip. I mean, I guess there's a lot of things in there that we don't really think about when it comes to negotiation, especially for project managers specifically. And that kind of leads into my next question that I want to ask here. And it really, so what I want to ask is, so engineers often focus on data and technical details of things, right? So what are some negotiation signals that might be overlooked by engineers, and how can we become more aware of those cues and maybe circumvent those issues?
I've seen this as a common pitfall for many engineers. First off, recognizing, going back to the awareness that there is commercial impacts with technical decisions, that broadening your view beyond simply the technical aspect of something is important. Some of the signals you can watch for are, is a customer asking you to sign something? Are they asking you something that's kind of beyond the scope? Are they pressing you for more information or for an enhanced scope? One of the red flags, there's a negotiation technique called slicing the salami. So if you picture, you've got a large piece of sausage. If I come to you and say, hey, could I have a bite of your sausage? And you cut me a piece off, you say, sure, here you go. Then I come back again and ask for another slice and another slice, etc. Well, pretty soon your sausage is now half the size. That's what slicing the salami is. So like what that would look like in a project context is, can I get 10 more manuals printed? Can you guys PDF all your drawings? Can you put them in this software? Can I get some extra spare parts? Can I get an extra field services trip? Alone, those things might not be worth a lot, but cumulatively, be aware that those things would add up over time. There's nothing better in project management than keeping track of what you are doing and closing the door on potential landmine spots. So as you're working through your project, continue to document that you've achieved milestones and that you've made it. Now, one final answer to this from a technical standpoint is understand what you're offering and what the holistic impacts are of a technical change. Let me give you a very real-world example. I used to work in the wastewater industry. We had a lot of tanks, and there was equipment submerged in tanks. We had one contractor ask, we had a 1-ton davit, which is a small crane on the side of the tank, which was part of our scope. We provided that davit. The contractor said, you know what, that the weight limit is right at the border. We're worried about it breaking in the future. Can we just get a 4-ton davit? And when we did the research, the difference between a 4 and a 1-ton davit was really small, like $500. So on the surface, that looks like a pretty, like on a multi-million-dollar project, well, that looks like a pretty small concession, right? What we didn't realize, and when this didn't happen, this is where the technical piece comes in. To put a 4-ton davit on that deck, you had to demo part of the deck. You had to re-pour a bunch of concrete and you had to modify a bunch of the hand railing. So your $500 price change in the davit alone ended up being like a $25,000 to $30,000 construction project on top of that.
Wow.
So when we agreed to give them this davit, the contractor said, well, you also agreed to all of these charges as well. We didn't sign up for this. This is part of, you made this concession. And so then we had a battle over those. So that would be my warning to technical project managers is beware of making a technical change. You might be making a bigger change than you realize, and that could have serious consequences.
Wow, that's very interesting that you say that. Well, number one, that you were in the wastewater industry. I find that to be quite interesting. I was as well. But also because the slicing the salami analogy that you're giving here is very similar to what we talk about in EMI, a concept called scope creep. And I mean, essentially the same exact thing. You have your project, you have your deliverables that you need for the project, but as the project goes on, a task gets added, and then another task gets added, and then another one, and then another one. And then pretty soon you are just cutting down the sausage, just like you had just mentioned. So I think that this is something that's very prominent amongst the whole entire industry, because sometimes clients don't exactly know all of what is actually required to get a project completed. Just like you had just mentioned, how the davits are, a $500 increase in charge per tank, but in all actuality, it ends up becoming a much, much larger project in the grand scheme of things. So I find that very interesting. And that actually leads into my next question for you. How do you approach saying no to these things? And what strategies can you share with the listeners to make it easier to say no?
There's a lot of different flavors of no. And let's begin by discussing the concept of prospect theory. Prospect theory was developed in the late 70s by some Harvard behavioral economists. And the concept is, and if you think about this in your own personal life, the feeling of losing something, the feeling of loss, is a much stronger feeling than the feeling of pleasure when you win something. When you win, it's like, okay, great, that was supposed to happen. I was supposed to come out on top. But when you lose, it hurts. Like you reflect on that, how painful that is. So when you say no to a customer, keep prospect theory in mind, because if you're treating them and they take away that they lost and they're carrying that bad feeling with them, that's something that could come back in retribution later in the project. So think about that. That's why saying no, just, an abrupt no is not a good idea in an engineering project. So there's a couple different ways that you can do that to avoid your counterpart having those types of feelings. This is going to be a bit longer answer, so let's diagnose this a little bit. Let's say on the other end, you have a very aggressive type of counterpart or customer engineer working with you. And they're just going on, and all project managers have been in that phone call or in that meeting where somebody's just, going on. That person is operating at a heightened level of their amygdala is operating at a heightened level. So what you want to do is to try to get them down. And there's a few things that you can do. So a lot of the experts advise mirroring, and I agree with that. So as somebody is going on about something, continue to repeat the last few words that they say in a very reflexive manner. So like, for example, oh, you gave me this davit. Now the tank is broken. We've got to do all this. This project is a total disaster. And you might say, the project's a total disaster? Yeah, you did this and this. And then you just keep building that until the temperature level comes down. And when it does, then you can start to have a better discussion. And what I found is helpful in this situation where somebody's making demands is just don't talk, listen, write down as much as you can, and then start to summarize and repeat back some of the things that they've been saying. This is the start at saying no. As technical folks, another tool in your tool chest is simply saying, if I do that, then there's going to be a consequence. So like, for instance, going back to our davit example, okay, if I give you that davit, it could result in thousands of dollars of rework to the concrete. Is that something you're willing to take on just for a different crane? well, hold on a second. That I didn't realize that might, that might not be the right move here. So instead of saying, no, I can't do that, you've now illuminated that there's going to be a consequence if you say yes. Leading your customer down that path is another way to do that. A third approach is to put the logistics on to the customer or onto the person making the ask. So like in the electrical world, you might say something like, we need this more many ports, we need this more many blocks, I need to hook up 5 more pieces of equipment into the control panel. Can you guys do that for me? You might take a moment, research that, and come back and say, I'm not sure how I can do that without adding, doubling the size of the footprint of the control cabinet. How would you like me to handle this? And then they would come back and say, you put the onus of research on them. Well, how much space do you have in your cabinet? Well, I've got 2 ports. Okay, well, can you put these 2 pieces of equipment in there? Which is it's a far smaller result for you, a more palatable result. So that's another way. I got a couple more, so I warned you, this is a long one.
Yeah, well, we would love to hear more about those. Definitely, if you have any other resources that you can share as well, maybe even after the conversation, we can continue to go into those things as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, that's a lot of different negotiation techniques there to think about. And the fact that you have more is even more amazing. I would say that I've definitely heard the last 2. I've never really seen mirroring actually done. I mean, coming from the public works sector, like myself, I've definitely seen the explanation of things in order to make it more realistic for people to actually understand what the implication is actually going to be, what the consequence can possibly be as a result of going through with a certain desire or a want that a project manager might have. And I would also say that I see that very prominently with upper level management that may not be as involved in the project. They kind of just see the numbers and they just want the actual result. But the actual project manager that's working on the ins and outs of the projects, like they're actually in the weeds, they have the full explanation as to why things are the way that they are. And they can actually give like the actual explanation as to, what are the increase in charges coming from? Like, why do we need to actually even take that route? And sometimes I think that there's a miscommunication in between like the client side or even the owner side, in between their management system, their ladder, their hierarchy, understanding what is all included in that project. So I find that to be quite interesting. And I wonder if there's actually a way that we can avoid those issues. But I guess that would probably be based on, willingness to listen, willingness to learn, willingness to sit down and just have a meeting and talk and discuss things between you and your upper level or lower level management. I think that can be a pretty big problem. And I know that project managers all over the world are probably looking at this and they're just like, this happens all the time.
Yep. Stakeholder management, managing up and avoiding scope creep up with owners is also an issue. And so some of these levers are also usable with them. I go back to my core philosophy in project management, that good project management prevents a lot of these difficult situations. And so a way to get on board with your stakeholders as a project manager, if you're not doing this, is to have periodic project reviews every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks as appropriate with your management staff and let them know how things are going. It's interesting to see different clients approach this differently, from daily Gemba meetings to it doesn't happen at all. But as project managers, you should be seeking to inform your upper stakeholders of what's happening and draw them in when you start to get into difficult situations. You mentioned managing owners in public works. So in the water industry, that's very common. A municipal wastewater plant in public works is the owner in our world, Matthew. Right. And so if an owner is starting to try to expand scope, an owner basically starts a wastewater project with an engineering spec. If they start to exceed the spec, you have the right to go back and say something like, all right, let me investigate that. I can get you a change order or proposal by the end of the week. And a lot of times just bringing up the term change order, proposal, cost, a lot of people just start to drop those requests. And in other cases, you've got not only a scope enhancement, you've got a financial enhancement too, which is a positive. So you've made a sale mid-project by selling a change order. So I think the situation to avoid as a project manager is to avoid basically giving away large pieces of scope without compensation. So if you can do that, then you're going to be in good shape.
I understand that. And I mean, the ditto on the change order conversation, seen that, done that plenty of times.
Yep.
Very, very well versed with it.
Yeah.
And also that kind of goes into my next topic as well. I want to talk about backcharges and how you think that project managers can actually effectively document project issues and those change orders. How can we make those things come into reality?
This one comes down to good communication and especially good organization. So backcharges will be triggered where there's a project misstep. If you've done something wrong in the project, that opens up the door for a customer, an owner, or your counterpart to ask you for some type of an enhancement. As a project manager, what you can do, and this depends on your project, the size of it, the complexity, etc., is to keep track of what's happening and to keep a good project record of different things that are going on. That can be tracked through schedules. It can be tracked in a software like Trello or Microsoft Project, or it can be tracked even in email. Let me give you some specifics. So one of the project milestones that often triggers damages is shipment. If you're late shipping your equipment to the site, we have the contractual ability to start charging you liquidated damages or some type of actual damages for a delay. So as a project manager, let's say you're staying on top of your suppliers, you've tracked the shipments, and you know you're going to ship on time. The next step to avoid back charges related to shipments is when your suppliers tell you they're going to ship, you've got a shipping tracker from the shipping company that says the equipment made it to site. The next step is to reach out to your customer and say, hey, great news. Looks like the equipment's arrived. Want to check in with you to just make sure that the container looks like it's in good shape. Did you have any questions or any pushback? And typically the response back from your customer would be, hey, thanks for reaching out. Yep, we got it last Wednesday. It looks okay, or just something like that, right? Okay, so what you've done here to prevent runaway back charges and liquidated damages is you've got them to validate that the milestone in the contract has been satisfied. You've shipped on time. And if you expand that into more milestones, the more you're checking in, more updates, and the regular communication you're having with customers, you're getting feedback from them that things are going according to plan. The more it goes according to plan, the less likelihood you're going to get a back charge. Now, if at the end of the project, this customer came back to you and says, hey, Matthew, you were 2 weeks late shipping. Well, you could dig out that document and say, well, hey, we talked about this. You said everything looked good. It's unbelievable how many times you can do that where a counterpart makes a claim and you can go back and say, we talked about this. That's an easy, immediate, effective way to completely dissolve a back charge that way.
Awesome. So documentation and communication are probably the two number one ways to make sure that you don't get a back charge. I've experienced that as well, back charges and things of that nature. And I think that in most cases, it might be more prominent with general contractors that may not have the language or the communication skills handy to be able to communicate effectively. It may not be as prominent amongst like engineering firms where they are kind of just a little bit better on the communication side, for lack of better words. But that's just my experience. Now, hopefully there's not a general contractor out there that's watching this episode that's going to try to take my head off for saying that. But I mean, hey, maybe you are the anomaly. I hope so, for your business sake. So can you share one basic financial skill that technical project managers should really get into and start developing to better interpret and manage data to avoid ineffective cost overrun recapture.
Yeah. So basically the question is, give me a financial skill to help me paying $1 bajillion in back charges. What's one thing I can do to start reducing a back charge that potentially came in? So in the industry, in project management in general, it's a very typical situation that a counterpart, a customer, a contractor, so forth, would hand you a huge bill. You've got the tersely worded legal letter. There's a giant number in it. And what they're trying to get you to do is to cut it in half. That is a built-in concession they are looking for. So if you have that in mind, interestingly, a lot of companies will just simply split those things in half and move on and consider that a win. But to me, that's not the way this should be done. If you encounter a very large back charge, what you want to do, and this is the CPA talking in me, is have that person account for every charge in the back charge itself. So let's use an example here. Your company is responsible, Matthew, and we both agree on this, for damaging 20 feet of sidewalk. So you get a back charge, and it includes a number of different lines in it. And one of those lines is 1,000 bags of concrete. Okay, so you look at this, you realize you damaged 20 feet of sidewalk, and there's 1,000 bags of concrete on your back charge. All right, the first thing you do is you need to attach the amount of materials used to the situation. 1,000 bags of concrete is vastly too much, or is way too much to cover 20 feet of sidewalk. How many bags would that take? 50, 75, 100 bags, something like that, right? I mean, just thinking out loud, 1,000 is exorbitant. So right there, you can say,
scamming.
Hey, this number is grossly off. Prove that you used 1,000 bags during this, right? All right, now you put the onus back on them. And the second thing, from a financial side, let's say you've got 1,000 bags of concrete times $250. So that's $250,000 of materials costs that they're alleging. All right, well, a bag of concrete is what? $10, $12 at Home Depot? It's not $250. So, okay, show me the receipt where you paid $250 for a bag of concrete. And I'll go to Home Depot and take a picture of a bag of concrete on a pallet and say, this is a reasonable cost, right? So you start making them support their numbers. If a customer cannot support their numbers, then they can't make that claim. Then it's a fishing contest, and they're trying to get you to split that. So using this example, Matthew, you owe me $250,000 for materials for my for the work I put in to fix 20 feet of sidewalk that you damaged. But I'm going to make you a deal. We'll cut that in half to $125,000. How does that sound? And you're like, wow, that's great. We got half off. But in reality, $125,000 is still grossly over the amount what it would take to fix that. So that's the skill to use, is when you get claims from different people, if it's a spreadsheet, if it's an email, and it doesn't have any backup, make that request for materials, for labor, and for overhead, to look at all of those different cost categories to get that backup. And then you start having that person bring down their number because they simply can't support it. And that's a core skill that I teach to different people, and I drill that with people as well to learn how to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think another thing to add on to it, which very much aligns with your point, is just understanding all of the nuances that go into your projects. I mean, I can speak from my experience here. When you're working in public works, you're working in asset management, maintenance, and rehabilitation. And so it's very easy to go ahead and tell a general contractor, much like your example, hey, I need this amount of sidewalk to be fixed, right? But you can't just go in, well, number one, you have the bidding process, obviously. So they have to bid their numbers in the contract and tell you how much it's actually going to cost for a specific section of sidewalk to be done. And you can transpose that amongst all of the rest of the sections of your sidewalk that you need to be addressed within your city. but you really just have to know exactly what goes into it. Like, what is the cost of the rebar going to cost? Like, how much sand do you need? How many inches of ground are you taking out on each side of the sidewalk before you install the new sidewalk in? And also, along with your example, how much concrete is it going to take in order for you to get a yard of sidewalk done? How many yards are you going to actually need? So I think that that's the other part of it too. Just knowing all of the ins and outs and really being, which one of our head project managers here at EMI says, Ann Tomilovich, by the way, she always goes by and says, you want to be the CEO of your projects.
Yes.
And that just means you don't just want to be the boss, like you want to know all of the ins and outs so you can know the costs, you can know how things are done. You don't actually have to get out there and do it, but you have to know how it's done. That way, those cost differences can't just come and beat you over the head. And then now you're looking around at your boss and you're saying, well, hey, I don't know exactly what happened here. They just ate up the budget. Well, how did that happen? And now you are looking for a job, just like the contractors are for stealing the sidewalk and construction materials from you. Yeah.
Yes.
So
CEO mentality is, I've preached that for a year. So your colleague is dead on the money. As the CEO of your project, treat your project like it's a company. Financial decisions, customer service, technical decisions. Each project is an individual company. And if you're the CEO of the company, how would you spend your own money when you're executing the project? That's how you should treat decision-making while you're going through it. That's great.
Nice. So how can technical project managers use their time, their schedule, their scope, and their financial leverage to their advantage in their negotiations?
In my experience, the two big levers, or the two most common levers that I have seen specifically in project management, is withholding money or leveraging some element of time. Now, people talk about future business and relationships, which are definitely important, but on an individual projects basis, payment and time are the two biggest levers. So when you think about that as a project manager, how can I use time and payments to my advantage? This is how I advise doing it. For payments, you have to maintain understanding of your customers' payments to you and the milestones that you have. So on a lot of common projects, you might have three major milestones, which would be engineering submittals, delivery of materials, and then final closeout or startup. And of course, this is a very generic, simplified example. There are more than those, but let's just hypothetically say those are the three biggies. So it's engineering submittals, a shipment, and then startup or some type of finalization step. If you send in all of your engineering submittals and you don't get paid, and then you ship all of your materials and you don't get paid, your customer owes you roughly 90% of your project value at this point. So after you ship something, any work you do before you get paid, you're conceding leverage to the other party for something big at the end. Instead, what you should do is, upon shipment, monitor the payment and make sure that you do get paid. And if you don't, you're going to have to say something like, hey, I noticed you haven't paid me for materials and engineering submittals. I'm not going to be able to come out and commission that, or I can't start your warranty, or I can't give you the final paperwork or the as-builts. Whatever those final steps are that customer needs to do with the owner, don't have them satisfy that until you're paid. That takes away a big leveraged chip that they have with you at the very end. Because if you haven't been paid anything and you've done all the work, they can continue to say, well, I'll pay you when you do this. I'll pay you when you do this. And that's where you're starting to see some major scope creep. The second thing is time. If there is a dispute, if it needs to be resolved before the end of the project, and if that customer has a deadline with their owner, and you know it, and you have a good case, you can leverage your position against time and just postpone the negotiation, or you can hold your argument, you can not make a concession, and let time bring that other person's counterpoints down. And that happens when, they need to submit final paperwork, or there's like a big public funding thing coming in where they've got to do some steps and you're part of that, and they can't get to those steps until you achieve the work. Using time like that as leverage is also a very strong way to get a good negotiated decision. I don't advocate doing that when you make a mistake. If you make a mistake, fix your mistake, right? Your top priority as a project manager is solving problems and making sure things are going smoothly. But if somebody's trying to get one on you at the end of a project, and we know in many industries that happens, an effective way around that is to use time as your biggest lever. So those would be my two ways to advocate project managers having a strong closeout of their projects.
Nice. All right, so now how do you ensure that you have effective collaboration between all of these different teams that we're talking about here? We're talking about finance, marketing, project management teams, the surveying teams. During these negotiations, how do you ensure that they have effective collaboration?
When you think about those different stakeholders you mentioned, so marketing is very concerned about the customer relationship and future business. A project manager is concerned about completing the project on time, under budget, within scope. Engineers might be concerned with a great technical decision. Those are all different types of things. To ensure collaboration among them, agreeing on what the criteria is for the project, an objective set of measurement criteria, I think is the most important thing. So in some cases, it might be the relationship that, all right, we really need this customer for future business, so we're not going to go, bare knuckles with them. We're going to make some concessions and move forward. Versus this is somebody who's really tough to do business with. We've been taken advantage of before, and we're going to drive a harder bargain in this case. So getting everybody in that room on the same page of what that criteria is a good way to ensure collaboration. And then you guys can move forward with whatever path is required to do that.
Nice. Okay. And here's the last question for you. So what final piece of advice do you have to share with any of our listeners who are looking to improve their negotiation skills and advance their careers in project management?
Yeah, when I think about that question, I think about the different teams that I've had and folks that I've mentored. And this goes for managers as well as project managers. So managers of project managers. When you get someone, really emphasize and enjoy the wins and teach people how to negotiate by having them practice. So like your young or new technical staff, if a $5,000 charge comes in, have them try to negotiate that down to $3,000 or $3,500 and see what you can get. Put them through those steps of going back and tracing the costs and try to justify the work done based on what the issue was. And have them practice on those smaller situations, not with the intent of driving a hard bargain, but with the intent of building muscle so that when it starts to come to the $100,000, $1 million level negotiations, they'll already have a bunch of wins under their belt. And they'll have some confidence going into that. As managers, it's important to assign younger staff that kind of work and to let them skin their knees. I think as managers, permitting mistakes that people can learn from is important. And having an environment, a learning environment, especially around negotiation, is critical. And if you're able to do that, you're going to start to raise the skill level of your entire staff. So that'd be my suggestion, is to practice.
That's awesome. I love that advice. Practicing, repetition. I mean, as you know, we're a learning and development company. And obviously one of the biggest things that we know about learning in general is just the importance of repetition, getting your reps in, just doing it over and over and over again. And I'm a huge proponent of the skinning your knees analogy that you just given. Sometimes you just have to get thrown into that fire a little bit where you may actually fail, but it's through that failure that you actually learn the best. It's not always that you're going to have a perfectly seamless environment where things are just going to be given to you easy and you're going to learn in a light and easy way. Sometimes you just have to take it the hard way. So I definitely agree and align with what you're saying a huge amount. And I think that that's important for anybody really that wants to be successful in this industry as well.
Absolutely right. You wouldn't train for a marathon and get off the couch and go to the start line. You got to start small and eventually build up to those bigger distances. It's the same thing with any business skill, especially something, a soft skill like negotiation. That's right on the money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys. So we're going to take a quick break here. And when we get back, we're going to put Rick in our hot seat for the PM Pitfall segment. Stay tuned. All right, everybody, welcome back. So it is now time for our PM Pitfall segment of the week with Rick Czaplewski. So Rick, we just wanted to ask you, what is the biggest PM pitfalls that you've identified in your career, and how would you recommend overcoming it or even avoiding it for those project managers that are watching out there?
For technical project managers, I believe the biggest pitfall is not realizing that there are commercial implications of technical decisions. That if you make a technical decision, it could have a very large cost impact or schedule impact, and not realizing that that could happen could really adverse the performance of your project. So as technical project managers, what I would advocate for is have a bigger view, the CEO view, holistic view of your project, so that when you make not just technical decisions, understand how that also fits into the bigger picture. And the way you would do that is you would diagnose and address a problem like you would technically, and then back up before communicating it and take a look at what that would do to your cost structure and your schedule. If you're doing that, you're going to come out ahead every time.
No, that's awesome. Excellent advice, Rick. We appreciate that. And also the conversation that we had as well. I mean, like we've already discussed, I think that negotiation skills is something that is not really often talked about, especially on this channel and especially like within our industry. It's kind of just something where people are just thrown into the fire and they just have to kind of learn, as you have said, with their knees skinned or bones broken for some people. But I think that, these are important conversations that we need to have. Yeah. I think that a lot of people are going to take a lot from what you have also discussed. I know that I will, certainly, especially with some of the negotiation skills and methods that you had even mentioned before, like especially mirroring. That is something that I've never heard about. So we really appreciate you having this discussion with us. And we just want to know a little bit more about, like where we can find you and find out more about what you do. Like if we can possibly follow you on LinkedIn or your websites or anything like that.
Hey, I appreciate it. So as the president of No One Walks Alone, I teach project managers and executives how to negotiate. And so my different types of training are available if you contact me on my website. Website address is noonewalksalone.biz, B-I-Z. So noonewalksalone.biz. Looking in the show notes, you can find my name and find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with you there, and would love to hear from you, listener. If you're interested in talking about negotiation, or if you have any feedback on the show, I'd like to hear what you have to say. So really appreciate you having me, Matthew. This has been a great conversation.
Good. Well, we're glad that you enjoyed, and we hope that you take care and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Please remember that you can find the show notes for this episode at www.engineeringpmpodcast.com. And it's going to be there that you're going to find a summary of all of the key points that we discussed in today's episode, as well as any of the links to the resources, websites, or books that we mentioned in this episode today. So until next time, I wish you all the very, very best in your project management endeavors. Take care.